Hey everyone. We've all been there, right? Stuck between what feels right and what feels like you have to do to get ahead. Well, today we're going to walk that exact tightrope and look at the kind of tough ethical choices that can really define a career.
But let me start by asking you something. If a statement is, technically true, but you know deep down it's misleading, is that still a lie? Just hang on to that thought, because it is right at the heart of the story we're diving into today.
All right, so let's meet Priya. She's the new head of product at a consumer goods company, and she is staring down a decision that could honestly make or break her entire career. And it all kicks off with one single, very persuasive-sounding marketing claim.
So an email lands in Priya's inbox from the chief marketing officer. It's for a new health drink, and it has this absolute killer of a marketing line. I mean, this thing is designed to make the product just fly off the shelves. It's powerful, it's punchy, but there's a problem.
Yeah, see, Priya knows the real story. That big 40% number? Turns out it's from a tiny, tiny study on just one of the ingredients at a dose that was 3 times higher than what's actually in their drink. So putting that on the bottle it just felt wrong. So she goes and talks to her colleague, Vikram, over in regulatory, and his take is really interesting. He's not trying to be shady. He basically says, look, it's a stretch, but it's not illegal. Our competitors are out there making even bolder claims. So the pressure isn't just coming from inside the company, it's coming from the entire market.
And that just brings up this huge question, right? How do good people working in good companies with the best of intentions end up in these murky gray areas? It almost never happens in one big leap. It happens step by step down what we call the slippery slope.
This isn't a story about a few bad apples. It's about how the system itself, the pressure to perform, can lead to a series of small, perfectly justifiable compromises that, they add up. They push really well-meaning people towards choices they'd never, ever make on their own.
And this is how it happens. It's fascinating when you break it down. First, finance comes in and says, hey, can we use a slightly cheaper ingredient to hit our margin goals? Makes sense. Then marketing says, we need flashier packaging to stand out on the shelf. Also makes sense. Then sales is like, we have to ship early to get that big order. Every single step seems logical on its own, but you put them all together and that amazing product you started with becomes, a disappointment.
And this just shows you the squeeze that people like Priya are in. You've got absolutely brutal competition. You have intense pressure from Wall Street for growth, maybe a company culture where you don't really question your boss. And on top of it all, that little voice saying, but everybody else is doing it. You can see how incredibly hard it is for just one person to put their hand up and say, hold on a minute.
So there's Priya, feeling totally trapped. Either she compromises her own values or she potentially sinks the company's biggest launch of the year. But then she talks to a mentor and she has this huge realization. The problem wasn't the 2 choices she had, it was the way the choice was being framed in the first place.
Her mentor helped her reframe the whole thing. It wasn't about integrity or success. That was a false choice. The real question, the much more creative and powerful question was, how do we achieve success with integrity? And just shifting from that yes or no dead end to a how can we mindset, it changed everything. So Priya's team didn't just reject the bad idea. They came back with a brilliant third option. Instead of that misleading claim, they developed what they called an honest positioning. It was still compelling, it still sounded great, but it was actually true. They completely changed the conversation from what's the boldest thing we can get away with to what's the most powerful truth we can tell our customers.
And here is the best part. The product launches with the honest claims and it blows past its sales projections. It turned out, in a market just drowning in hype, customers were desperate for a brand they could trust. Honesty wasn't a liability, it was their biggest competitive advantage.
But Priya's win taught everyone an even bigger lesson. One person's integrity, one person's courage, that's not a reliable system. You can't just hope for heroes. You have to build a system, an ethical infrastructure that actually makes it easy for people to do the right thing. And that's exactly what she helped the company build. They created a system with 5 key pieces. First, they set clear, explicit boundaries on what they would and wouldn't say. They created an advisory process so nobody felt alone trying to figure out a gray area. They protected people who raised concerns, they tied ethics to bonuses and reviews, and they started doing regular audits to catch these things early. And the real magic of this whole system was that it took the personal risk out of it. An employee didn't have to say, I feel uncomfortable with this, which is a really vulnerable position. Instead, they could just say, this goes against our documented company policy. It gave them the backup they needed to make the right call without risking their career.
Which brings us right back to that key question. Priya's story shows us that being ethical and being successful are not opposites. In fact, over the long haul, integrity might be the most powerful engine for growth there is. So the question I'll leave you with is this. In your own work, in your own company, what's the most powerful, compelling truth you can tell?